Hi, I recently got the Ochd Expander from Instruo, so as soon as I saw it available, I rushed to Signal Sound, spent my hard-earned cash picking up this little 4 HP module, which takes an already really useful source of modulation in the Ochd and expands it with 16 more outputs. The Ochd Expander is connected on the back to the Ochd, so you do need an Ochd to actually make this work, and the waveforms that you see here are what drive the outputs on the expander. So I wanted to come up with a patch that actually put this to work. And what I did was I used my Polygogo, which is an oscillator that has a very unique approach to synthesis using what's called polygonal synthesis. And I combined it with some of my other favorite modules, the QPAS filter from Make Noise and the new Yester Versio delay from Noise Engineering. The goal of this patch is to really throw as much modulation as possible at just about everything you see here and see what the result is. And I think you'll agree the result is pretty crazy. Well, as you can hear, that took on a lot of life. There was a huge amount of movement, and of course, there was a lot of modulation going all over the place from Ochd. So let's get patching now, and I'm going to show you how that patch got built, and along the way, we'll learn something about all these different waveforms coming out of the Ochd Expander. Okay, let's dive in with some patch setup, and we'll just start by patching the inputs and outputs here. It's going to be a very simple audio path, because it's just going to be the output of the QPAS going into the delay, and I'm going to be feeding the Polygogo into the QPAS itself. And then we'll patch the output of QPAS into the input of the Yester Versio. Now, if I turn up the level in QPAS here and just dial off the filter itself, and everything's turned off here on Versio, we'll just hear the output of the Polygogo. In terms of an oscillator, you can get some crazy sounds out of this. Obviously, you can modulate the pitch, but as you can see, if you adjust the number of sides from a circle all the way down to triangle, you get different harmonics. And these are the modulation knobs here that allow you to scale this voltage here. And then you're able to fold the waveforms and introduce higher harmonics. And you can rotate it in the stereo space, so the XY outputs are now rotating. As you can hear now, we get that lovely movement in the sound. A little bit of slow movement is often good. We've got an FM operator here. We can introduce different amounts of FM. And things get very crazy very quickly. And that's why we might want to do a bit of filtering on it. The display is so beautiful to look at on this. You see, just by adjusting the FM amount, and I have the regular mode enabled here, you can also turn on cycle, which as it draws it redraws from a new point each time. Actually, I like the sound of that. Now, the first thing I want to do is put a somewhat predictable clock into my delay. So what I'm going to do is take a trigger output. Now, the way the Ochd Expander computes triggers is it uses the LFOs as the input to create a different trigger type. And some of these are slower triggers and some of these are faster triggers, and this is just a little mivolts illuminated mult that I use. Very handy for seeing signals, and as you can see, that one's a much faster trigger, so we'll use this one here, a nice predictable trigger derived from the speed of the LFOs. If I sped up the LFOs, triggers will get faster. Okay, so we're going to patch that into the tap tempo input on Yester Versio, so our delays are clocked. Right, now let's get modulating on the Polygogo. And what we're going to do is we're going to start patching the outputs of these different waveforms here. These are rectified, so basically the positive half of the waveform here. This goes from -5 to +5, so this is just from 0 to +5. And this set of waveforms here are min-max pairs. So the idea here is that it takes the 4 LFOs, these two output the maximum values at that point in time, and these two are the minimum values. So you got a very varying kind of wave shapes coming out of here because these are constantly shifting and changing and they're not fully in sync with each other. So we'll patch order and then we'll bring up the order. Let's bring up the sound. And I'm going to turn off regular so we have constant movement there. Now you hear how we're constantly shifting and changing the order there. Next, let's go and modulate the teeth. Remember, teeth controls how the polygons being drawn are folded and introduces a lot of higher order harmonics into the sound. And so I'm going to modulate that using, say, Ochd 1, 2, 3. Let's use this one here. Okay. Now we're getting some movement in the sound. We're going to modulate QPAS in a second. Now I want to modulate the two FM operators over here. So what I will do is take the stepped random variation here and put that into the operator ratio. And then I'm going to patch, say, maybe this wave here, green cable, to the operator amount. Now I have the slider at a very extreme setting there, because I want this to go from one extreme to another. And we're also going to patch the wave folder in as well. And we'll give this a stepped value. Say we'll take this one here. It'll be pretty slow, the wave folding. And I'll fold all these cables out of the way in a second. So we were already getting some crazy sounds coming out of this. And we start bringing down the frequency on the QPAS of the filter, and a little bit of resonance on it. We can start to already begin to hear things are getting pretty wild. Now let's do a little bit of modulation on QPAS. One of the things we can do is modulate the resonant peaks. Now the nice thing about QPAS is you get 4 resonant peaks, 2 pairs, which can move around in the stereo space. And we can modulate those quite extensively using these CV inputs here, and that creates a ton of movement in the sound. So let's modulate the rotate right and left CV inputs here, which correspond to the left and right peaks. Again, we'll use these min-max waveforms because they're actually quite good for this kind of thing. And I generally turn the peaks away from each other. And I'll use this max min output, sorry, because the lower ones are the min and the top ones are the max, into the left peak. So already things are getting a bit wild. Woo! Let's modulate the resonance. We'll say this output here, we might as well use them all up. And we can do something very unusual with the QPAS. We can ping it by sending triggers into this and this input here. They have this curious little exclamation marks on them. So let's just take these outputs here, say into that. And we can take this one into here. Okay, things are getting really wild now. We're not done modulating. Let's modulate some parameters on the Yester Versio. And one of the first ones I want to modulate is the chorus amount, because the lovely thing is it has a built-in chorus in the delay loop. I'll just turn this up. So let's go ahead and modulate that chorus amount, and I'll just modulate it with a very slow LFO coming from Ochd, say this one here. I'll patch that into chorus here. And now we'll get chorus swells happening. Now we can start to do something very unusual. Basically, we can turn the oscillator's frequency all the way down to nothing. And we get these kind of raindrop effects. Now, typically you wouldn't do this. If you turn an oscillator's frequency down to nothing, the waveform just basically stops and you don't get any more sound. But because of this unusual synthesis that's going on in the Polygogo, combined with the amount of modulation we're feeding it, do you hear how we're getting these constantly evolving and changing plucky sounds? And I think what we can do is even modulate the filter cutoff frequency a bit here. There we go, on QPAS. And you hear that chorus swelling slowly now in the background there. Well then, that brings me to something else I want to do, which is use a sequencer of notes. I have sequencer X here on my Ornament and Crime running Phaserville, of course, and I'm going to use that to send a sequence of notes, unquantized, nothing special, in here. And we are going to clock that from our one remaining clock output here using this trigger output, which won't be a very steady clock. It will generate some interesting effects nonetheless. Let's tidy up these cables so we can keep an eye on what's going on and see a little bit more clearly. And there now you hear how this is slowly modulating away. I think we can actually play around now with the sliders and just listen to how the sound changes. Now, one of the things I wanted to do was play around with these Gliss touch controllers from Bella Instruments. I have two of them which they sent to me. The first one I have just configured as a very simple capacitive touch strip. If I move my finger up and down, it allows me to output a voltage from, I think, 0 to 5 volts. There we go, on the output there. This one I have as a motion recorder. So if we just do this kind of thing, and now you see it recorded my finger making a movement. I'll just reset that down to there. Now, let's use this and patch it around into our patch. One thing we might want to do is adjust the wave folder amount. So let's use the output over here into the wave folder input on Yester Versio. Now let's take a listen to what happens when we play with this. That's pretty extreme. So what I'm going to do, I can adjust the voltage range on Gliss, but just for simplicity, I'm just going to patch the output of Gliss here into this Opal, which is an attenuverter from Nekyia Instruments. We'll just reduce the range now to something a bit more manageable. There, that's better. Another thing we could do, of course, is we could modulate the cutoff frequency of the filter manually. So this time, rather than sending an LFO into it, I'm going to use a motion recorded sequence here. I'll use that to reduce the filter frequency. Now you hear the filter is closing, opening back up, closing again. See how it's recorded the smooth movements I did with my finger? Brought my finger back down. Take a listen to this, and here what we're hearing is the effect of Ochd modulating all of the various filter frequencies on Odessa, but also the Sealegs delay as well. So that video showed you that you don't need to do crazy ambient noise experiments with Ochd. You can use it in more, shall we say, regular patches too. That's it for this video. I hope it gives you some ideas for patching using the Ochd and Ochd Expander. You don't need these exact modules, of course, to use it. It can be used in any other patch you have with the modules that you have at home. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to stay up to date on videos. Leave me some comments or questions in the comment section down below. I love hearing from people and do try to answer everything. And thanks for watching.